Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing some concepts from Chapter 10 of Maxfield and Babbie. And Chapter 10 is all about qualitative research. Qualitative research consists of data collection methods such as interviews, where we might sit down and interview a person, or ethnographic observation, where we actually go out and observe or participate in some activity and then record our findings about that activity. Qualitative research is good for exploratory and descriptive research purposes. It is commonly done when there is a new topic that we don't know a lot about, and so we do qualitative research to develop a fuller, better understanding of that topic. A classic example is John Van Manen's work with police academies in the 1970s. So John Van Manen was a sociologist, and he was really interested in knowing what went on in the police academy. And prior to his study, we really didn't understand a lot about police academies, but he actually enrolled in the police academy himself and went through the training and then spent a year working with police officers that graduated with his class. And he did interviews and observations, and then he wrote up his findings about what went on in the police academy. And so everything that we know about the police academy is because of John Van Manen's work in the 1970s. Qualitative research is also good when we just want to develop a deeper understanding of an existing topic. It's also used to develop new theories. So a lot of our theories of delinquency and theories of offending originated from qualitative research in which sociologists and psychologists interviewed offenders and asked them about some of their decision-making processes. If you think of the show Mindhunter, for instance, on Netflix, Mindhunter is all about how a couple of FBI agents developed the behavioral analysis unit at the FBI. And they did this by conducting interviews with serial killers and asking them to describe the thought processes that they engaged in when they murdered somebody. And also to describe their childhood and to describe their relationships with their parents and childhood trauma. So this is an example of qualitative research. And from this, we can develop theory. Edwin Sutherland, for instance, interviewed a lot of white-collar criminals, and he used the information that they gave him to develop differential association theory. So differential association theory is the idea that criminal behavior is learned and that we learn to engage in criminal or antisocial behavior from our friends and our peers. And a lot of this came from the fact that he noticed in his interviews that a lot of offenders talked about the fact that they learn different techniques of white-collar crime from their friends and coworkers. And not only did they learn these techniques, but they also learned how to justify them. Sometimes qualitative research is done in conjunction with quantitative research to develop a deeper understanding of some themes that we've discovered due to quantitative research. So for instance, we might conduct a survey, let's say of police officers, and we find some unusual things through that survey. And then in order to understand why we arrived at those findings, we then might interview a sample of officers and bring up those questions and just ask them, hey, we had these anomalous findings in the survey. Maybe officers were saying that they don't like patrolling in this particular area. Why do you think that is? So we can get a better understanding that way. We can talk a little bit about the differences between qualitative and quantitative research designs. For the purposes of this example, let's just say that we're interested in knowing about community policing and how police agencies do community policing and what community policing means to them. In a quantitative design, we might develop a paper questionnaire, and then we would do a probability sample of police departments all over the US and then send out that paper questionnaire or that survey via the mail. Now, because we used probability sampling techniques, we can generalize the findings of our sample to our target population of police agencies. However, because we're doing a mail survey, we are restricted in the sense that we can only ask them so many questions. Questions are inflexible, right? We can't change questions once we've administered the survey. And also, we can't really get into specifics because we have to develop a survey that's going to be relevant to everyone. So if we send out this survey to 500 agencies, all 500 agencies have to be able to answer the questions in a very similar way. So from this, we develop a very broad and general understanding of the topic, and it's generalizable because we use probability sampling techniques. But the problem is that we can't really appreciate the finer details. Okay, so for instance, one of our questions, we might ask an agency, do you engage in community-oriented policing? That might be one of our survey questions. And this is a simple dichotomous yes or no question. And we might find that 80% of our agencies say yes, they do community policing. So obviously, that's an interesting finding, and it's generalizable because we use probability sampling techniques, so we can use it to speak for our target population of police agencies, and we can say that yes, probably roughly 80% of our police departments do community policing. But we miss a lot of the finer details. So community policing as a term and as a practice is very broad. It could mean different things to different agencies. So, for example, to one agency, community policing might mean that they do bike patrols through their neighborhoods. Another agency might have fixed beat assignments for their officers so that their officers get to know residents and people on their beat. Another agency's conception of community policing might be having their officers play football with kids after school. Another agency might have their officers attend neighborhood watch meetings. Another agency might just simply paint community police unit on some of their cars. And that is their conception of community policing. And that's a humorous example, but some agencies actually do this. They actually just print community policing on their cars so they can say that they do community policing in order to receive government funding. Because the government provides funding to agencies that prove that they do community policing. But the point is that with that quantitative survey where we just ask agencies simply, do you do community policing, yes or no, we miss a lot of the nuances and the finer details of how agencies do community policing in practice. Okay? And that's just because of the research design that we used. However, if we do qualitative research allows us to get a better understanding of what community policing is and how community policing works. Now, due to costs and time, we can't go big, okay? We can't send researchers out to those 500 agencies to interview all of them and do observation on all of them to understand how they do community policing. So what we do is we select a smaller sample for our qualitative study. So we might take a single agency, let's say Orlando Police Department, and then we go to Orlando Police Department and we interview the officers and we ask them, hey, how do you guys do community policing? What does community policing mean to you? We could also send researchers to do ride-alongs and do observations of officers in the community and then write up what they find. And then we can develop a very deep and rich understanding of what community policing is and how it works and what it means to the officers and how they do it in practice. Okay. The problem is we lose generalizability because we just did the study at this one agency. All right. So even though we have this really great understanding of community policing, it's not generalizable to police agencies at large because we just did the study in one agency. We just did it in Orlando. So we have some really interesting findings and a really good story to tell, but it's not generalizable. And that's the key difference between quantitative and qualitative design. So quantitative designs give us a very broad and general understanding of research findings. And if we use probability sampling, those findings are applicable to a wider audience. They're applicable to a target population. Qualitative research, on the other hand, gives us a deeper, richer understanding of a topic, but usually we have a much smaller sample. We don't use probability sampling, and so our findings are not generalizable. Which method is better? It's impossible to answer that question because it just depends on your study goals. Okay. If we're trying to get a general understanding of how many agencies do community policing, we might use a quantitative survey, and then we might use a probability sampling technique. If we want to get a deep understanding of what community policing is and how it's practiced, then we'd probably do a qualitative study. We might pick one or two agencies and then go deep with those agencies in terms of interviews and ethnographic observation. All right. So those are the key differences. If you have any questions about this, as usual, I encourage you to send me an email and I would be happy to address them.